The morning my son turned 9 was supposed to start with laughter, candles, and the smell of pancakes. Instead, it began with silence so thick it made my chest feel tight. I woke before sunrise, like I always did on Ethan's birthday. Olivia usually beat me to the kitchen on days like this. She loved making a big deal out of birthdays, balloons taped to chairs, wrapped presents stacked neatly on the table, music playing low while coffee brewed. It was her ritual, her way of making memories feel permanent. But that morning, there was nothing. No smell of coffee drifting through the hallway. No sound of cabinet doors opening. No quiet humming from the kitchen. Just silence. I stepped into the hallway and called her name once. Softly at first. Olivia. No answer. I walked into the kitchen expecting to see decorations half finished or ingredients scattered across the counter. Instead, the counters were bare. The chairs were tucked in neatly. The sink was empty. It looked like no one had been there for hours. That's when my phone buzzed. A single notification. From the bank. I frowned and unlocked the screen. Still half asleep. At first, I thought it was just a routine alert. Maybe a payment cleared overnight. But when the numbers loaded, my breath stopped. $65,000 was gone. Not moved. Not pending. Gone. My heart began pounding so loudly I could feel it in my ears. My hands went cold. And for a second, I told myself it had to be a mistake. Banks made errors. Systems glitched. Fraud happened all the time. But something inside me already knew this wasn't random. I walked quickly toward my home office, forcing my legs to move even though my body felt heavy. I pushed open the door and froze. Olivia's financial laptop was gone. So were several folders from the locked cabinet we kept near the desk, the ones that held insurance policies, vendor agreements, and recent tax records. That's when the truth hit me. This wasn't fraud. This was planned. And I was only just beginning to understand how deep it went. I forced myself to breathe slowly before walking back down the hallway toward Ethan's room. No matter what was happening, he still deserved a birthday morning that felt normal. I knocked softly on his door and pushed it open. He was already awake, sitting cross-legged on his bed, holding a small toy car in his hand. His eyes lit up the moment he saw me. "Is it time yet?" he asked, grinning. "Did Mom make pancakes?" The question hit harder than anything else that morning. I forced a smile, even though my stomach felt like it was twisting into knots. "Not yet," I said gently. "We're getting started." He bounced slightly on the bed, full of excitement. "Are my friends still coming later? And did Mom get the chocolate cake?" Every word he spoke made the silence in the house feel heavier. "Yeah," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We'll figure everything out." I walked back toward the kitchen and grabbed my phone again. I dialed Olivia's number. Straight to voicemail. I hung up and tried again. Same result? No ringing. No delay. Just voicemail. Like the phone had been turned off completely. That's when I noticed something else. Her car wasn't in the driveway. I stepped outside, squinting into the morning light. The space where her SUV usually sat was empty. No tire marks. No note taped to the door. Nothing that explained why she would leave this early on Ethan's birthday of all days. A slow knot formed in my chest. Olivia never left without telling me. Not on important days. Not on days that mattered to Ethan. I went back inside and sat down at the kitchen table, opening the banking app again. My fingers trembled slightly as I scrolled through the account details. The balance was still wrong. Still missing $65,000. I tapped into the transaction history and stared at the numbers until they blurred together. At first, I expected to see one large withdrawal, something obvious and immediate. But that's not what I found. Instead, there were smaller transfers. One here, another 2 weeks later, then another. Amounts small enough to avoid attention, small enough to blend into regular activity. But when added together, they formed one massive whole. This hadn't happened overnight. This had been happening for months. A cold realization settled into my mind. She didn't take the money all at once. She drained it slowly, carefully, like someone emptying a tank one drop at a time so no one would notice until it was too late. I leaned back in the chair, pressing my palms against my forehead as memories began resurfacing. Olivia had always insisted on handling the finances. She said it made things easier, more organized, less stressful for me while I focused on running the business. At the time, it felt like teamwork. Now it felt like blindness. A sudden sound echoed from the living room. A soft notification tone. Not from my phone. From Ethan's tablet. "Dad," he called. I stood up slowly, my heart pounding again, and walked toward him. He sat on the couch, staring down at the screen, his expression uncertain. "Mom texted me," he said quietly. Every muscle in my body went tight. "What did she say?" I asked. He looked at the screen, then back at me, like he wasn't sure whether he should read it aloud. Finally, he cleared his throat. "She said she's okay," he said. "She said she's in Bali." The word hit me like a physical blow. Bali, halfway across the world. Ethan kept reading. "She said she needed a break," he continued softly. "She called it a reset she deserved." I felt anger rise up inside me so fast it made my vision blur. But I swallowed it down, forcing my expression to stay calm for Ethan's sake. "Was there anything else?" I asked carefully. He tapped the screen once more. A photo appeared. Olivia and Vanessa stood side by side inside what looked like an airport lounge. Both smiling. Both holding drinks. No fear. No regret. No hesitation. Just excitement. Like they were starting a vacation, not destroying a life. I sat down slowly beside Ethan, staring at the image while something cold settled deep inside my chest. She didn't run in panic. She left in confidence, like everything was going exactly according to plan. Ethan shifted beside me, fidgeting with his fingers. "Dad," he said hesitantly. I turned toward him. "What is it?" He swallowed hard before speaking again. "Mom told me something last night." My chest tightened. "What did she say?" He hesitated, eyes dropping to the floor. Then he whispered, "She said, if something weird happens, don't be scared." The words sent a chill straight through my body. Why would she warn him? Why prepare him? Ethan looked up at me again, his voice barely audible. "And Dad," he added softly, "she said you wouldn't understand until later." That's when I realized this wasn't just about missing money. This was the beginning of something much bigger. I sat in my office long after Ethan's words faded into silence, staring at the glowing screen like it might reveal answers on its own. The house felt different now. Not broken, not loud, just wrong. Like something invisible had shifted beneath the surface. I wiped my hands against my jeans and leaned closer to the keyboard. The banking screen was still open. Olivia's last session frozen in place like she had only stepped away for a moment. The cursor blinked steadily. Prescient. Waiting. That detail made my stomach tighten. She hadn't rushed. She hadn't panicked. She had logged in calmly, completed whatever she needed to do, and then walked out the door like she was closing a chapter she had already written. I clicked deeper into the account history, forcing myself to slow down and focus. Panic wasn't going to fix anything. Numbers might, scrolling back month by month. The pattern became clearer. Small transfers. Not large enough to trigger alerts. Not frequent enough to look suspicious. But they were there, spread across weeks, disguised among grocery payments, utility bills, and normal expenses. 10,000 here, 3,000 there, then smaller amounts. Never the same number twice. Whoever planned this knew exactly how to avoid attention. I leaned closer, squinting at the dates. The first transfer had happened nearly 5 months ago. 5 months. My chest tightened as embarrassment crept in alongside fear. I had sat in this same chair hundreds of times while this was happening. Trusted the numbers without really studying them. Trusted Olivia without questioning anything. That trust felt like a weakness now. I grabbed a notepad from the corner of the desk and began adding the amounts together manually, one line at a time. Each number pressed heavier against my chest than the last. When I reached the total, I stopped writing. $65,000. Not stolen in one moment. Built slowly. Like someone draining water from a tank, knowing exactly how long it would take before anyone noticed. I leaned back in the chair and stared at the ceiling. How long had she been planning this? How many nights had she sat beside me, talking about normal things, while secretly moving money behind my back? A wave of anger rose inside me, but I forced it down. Anger clouds judgment. Right now, I needed clarity. I clicked out of the personal account and opened the business dashboard. At first glance, nothing seemed wrong. Balances looked stable. Expenses matched expectations. But something inside me refused to relax. So I started digging deeper. I opened the emergency reserve account, the one we rarely touched. That money was supposed to stay untouched unless something catastrophic happened. Equipment failure. Supplier crisis. Legal emergency. The numbers loaded. My pulse skipped. The balance was lower than it should have been. Not empty, but wrong. I scrolled through the transaction list carefully. Line by line. There it was again. An unfamiliar entry. Recipient name. North Shore Logistics Group. I frowned. Reading it twice. North Shore Logistics Group. The name meant nothing to me. I ran the memory through my mind, searching for any connection. Supplier. Shipping partner. Contractor. Nothing. We didn't use logistics companies. Our business designed interiors. We hired contractors, not shipping firms. I clicked into the transaction details. More transfers. Multiple ones. Each spaced weeks apart. Each labeled as operational expense. Except they weren't. They were something else. Something hidden behind professional language. A slow chill crawled up my spine. Why would Olivia send money from our company to a business I'd never even heard of? I opened the company email system next. Fingers moving faster now. Search bar. Keyword. North Shore. Several results appeared. Most deleted. That detail made my throat tighten. Deleted messages always meant something had been hidden. Luckily, our server archived backups automatically. I restored the deleted folder and waited as the messages loaded one by one. There. One subject line stood out immediately. Final confirmation pending. My finger hovered over the mouse for a second before clicking it open. Inside the email sat a document attachment. Formal. Legal language. Dense paragraphs filled with terms I didn't immediately recognize. I scrolled slowly, scanning the text. Halfway down, my breath caught. Olivia's digital signature sat neatly at the bottom of the preliminary section, but mine wasn't there. That detail mattered more than anything else. I leaned closer to the screen, rereading the final lines carefully. The contract required 2 signatures, hers and mine. Without both, it remained inactive. A thin thread of relief slipped through the panic. Whatever she planned, it wasn't finished yet. I scrolled further down the page, toward the final section, toward the part most people ignored. That's where the real danger lived. The penalty clause. My pulse thudded harder with each line. If activated, all financial liability transferred to the company owner. Not shared. Not balanced. Individual responsibility. That meant me. Not Olivia. Not Vanessa. Me? I sat back slowly, staring at the screen while the meaning settled into place. This wasn't just about money. This was about responsibility. Debt. Risk. Everything collapsing onto my shoulders. A memory surfaced suddenly, sharp and unwelcome. 2 weeks earlier, dinner table. Olivia sitting across from me, flipping through documents casually while asking questions. At the time, they seemed harmless. Routine. Now they felt surgical. What happens if a supplier sues us? She had asked that night. I remembered shrugging. Insurance covers most of it, I said. And if insurance changes, she pressed. I had laughed lightly back then. Didn't think twice about answering. Didn't think twice about trusting her curiosity. Now that memory burned. Because it wasn't curiosity. It was preparation. I returned to the present with a sharp breath, staring back at the screen. That's when I noticed something else buried inside the contract details. A separate invoice. Unpaid. Marked overdue. I opened the vendor list quickly, scanning through familiar names. 2 outstanding balances appeared, ones I had never personally approved. Late payments were rare in our company. We built relationships through reliability. Being late wasn't just inconvenient, it damaged trust. I rubbed my temples slowly. If suppliers stopped trusting us, the business would collapse faster than any lawsuit. That's when another email notification appeared in the corner of the screen. Payment reminder, urgent. My chest tightened. The message was brief but clear. Payment deadline approaching. Failure to respond could result in service suspension. Service suspension meant halted work. Halted work meant lost clients. Lost clients meant lost revenue. This wasn't random sabotage. This was weakening infrastructure piece by piece. I swallowed hard and opened a web browser. Typed the unfamiliar company name into the search bar. North Shore Logistics Group. Results appeared quickly. A website. Minimal. Professional looking. But empty. No real team photos. No detailed history. No verified client testimonials. Just generic language and stock images. Too polished. Too hollow. My instincts screamed. Something about it didn't feel real. I clicked into the company registration records. Scrolled through official details. Owner name listed clearly. I stopped breathing for a second. Vanessa Cole. Olivia's best friend. The name burned into the screen like it was mocking me. Vanessa wasn't just involved. She owned the company. The same company receiving our money. The same company tied to the contract. The same company waiting for my signature. A deep, cold realization settled into my chest. They didn't just leave together. They built something together. Behind my back. Behind my trust. Behind my life. My phone vibrated suddenly against the desk. A sharp sound in the quiet room. I picked it up slowly. Another bank notification. My pulse quickened as I opened the message. Scheduled transfer pending. Set to activate within 48 hours. 48 hours. I stared at the screen, feeling time suddenly shift from abstract to real. Whatever Olivia started, it wasn't finished yet, and the clock was already running. The house no longer felt like home. I stood in the doorway of my office, staring down the hallway toward the living room, listening to the faint sound of Ethan shifting on the couch. The silence wasn't peaceful anymore. It pressed against my ears, thick and uncomfortable, like the walls themselves were holding secrets. Just hours ago, this place had been normal, safe, predictable. Now every corner felt unfamiliar. I stepped into the living room slowly. Ethan sat exactly where I had left him earlier, his tablet resting on his lap but untouched. No games playing, no cartoons. Just the dim glow of the screen lighting his face. That alone told me something was wrong. Normally, he would have been bouncing around the house by now, asking about presents, reminding me how old he was turning, counting down until his friends arrived later that afternoon. Instead, he sat still, watching me carefully, like he was waiting for something. My chest tightened. "Hey," I said gently, forcing calm into my voice. "You okay?" "Buddy," he nodded, but the movement looked forced. Not natural, not relaxed. I walked over and sat beside him, lowering myself slowly so I didn't startle him. "What did Mom tell you last night?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he stared at his hands, fingers twisting together in that nervous way he had whenever he felt unsure. I had seen that gesture before, first days of school, doctor visits, moments when he didn't know what was coming next. This time felt worse. "Finally," he whispered. "She said not to tell anyone until you asked." The words hit harder than I expected. Not tell anyone. Until I asked. That wasn't casual parenting. That was instruction. Carefully planned instruction. A cold ripple moved down my spine. "Okay?" I said softly, keeping my tone steady. "You can tell me now." He hesitated again, then slowly slid off the couch and walked toward the hallway. "Come with me," he said. I followed him into his bedroom, my pulse growing louder with each step. His room looked mostly the same as always, posters on the wall, scattered toys near the bed, school books stacked neatly on the desk. But something felt different. More organized? Too organized. He walked straight to his desk drawer and pulled it open. From inside, he lifted a small blue notebook. I recognized it immediately. I had given it to him last Christmas, thinking he would fill it with drawings or superhero sketches. Instead, he held it carefully, like it contained something important. He handed it to me without speaking. I opened it slowly. Inside weren't drawings, not even doodles, just numbers, short words, symbols written neatly in careful handwriting. At first, they didn't make sense. Then I turned the page, and my breath caught. A username, written clearly. Another page, password variations, different combinations of letters and numbers. My heart began to pound. This, I said slowly, my voice barely steady. Where did this come from? Ethan swallowed hard. Mom told me to write them, he said quietly. The words landed like stones in my chest. Why? I asked. He shrugged slightly, looking down at the floor. She said it was important, he whispered. In case something happened. Something happened. The phrase echoed in my mind like a warning I had missed. I closed the notebook carefully and walked back toward my office, Ethan following behind me. My hands trembled as I sat down at the desk. Slowly, carefully, I typed the username into the banking portal. Denied. I tried the first password listed. Denied again. My pulse grew louder. Sweat gathered at the back of my neck. I tried the third password. This time, the screen paused. Loading. 1 second. 2. 3. Then it opened. A new dashboard appeared, one I had never seen before. My breath stopped. This wasn't one of our known accounts. This was something hidden. A sub-account. Private. Completely separate from the main financial overview. The name at the top read, Hale Strategic Holdings. I stared at the words. Confusion mixing with dread. I had never approved that name. Never authorized its creation. Never even heard it mentioned. I clicked into the balance tab. The numbers loaded slowly. Not empty. Not drained. Money still sitting there. Not the full amount, but enough to matter. Enough to change everything. Why would she leave money behind? Unless it wasn't meant to be taken yet. Unless it was waiting. For something. I swallowed hard and clicked into the transaction history. Rows of scheduled transfers appeared. Not completed. Not yet. Future dated. My pulse spiked. One line caught my eye immediately. Phase 2 allocation. I read it twice. Phase 2. That meant there had been a Phase 1. And Phase 1 had already happened. My chest tightened as realization settled in. This wasn't an escape. It was a sequence. A plan moving forward step by step. I scrolled further down. Recipient organization listed clearly. North Shore Logistics Group. The same name from earlier. The same company owned by Vanessa. The connection locked into place. They weren't improvising. They were executing. I leaned back slowly in my chair, feeling the weight of it all press against my chest. Then I turned toward Ethan. He stood in the doorway, watching me closely, waiting. Did Mom make you write all of this? I asked gently. He nodded. His eyes glistened slightly. But he didn't cry. She said it was important. He repeated softly. The words hurt more the second time. Not because they were loud. Because they were calm. Too calm for a child his age. She also said, he continued quietly. I waited. My pulse steady but heavy. Not to tell you unless things got scary. A cold chill spread through my body. Things got scary. She expected something to happen. Expected fear. Prepared for it. Why? What did she think was coming? Before I could ask anything else, my phone buzzed sharply against the desk. I picked it up. My fingers stiff. Unknown number. No name. No location. Just numbers. I hesitated before opening the message. Something about it felt deliberate. Careful. like someone watching from far away. I tapped the screen. A photo appeared. It loaded slowly, pixel by pixel. Then the image sharpened. Olivia, standing beside Vanessa. Poolside. Bright sunlight reflecting off blue water. Champagne glasses raised in celebration. Designer shopping bags scattered nearby. They were smiling, laughing, relaxed, like they were on vacation instead of tearing our life apart. My jaw tightened as anger settled deep inside my chest. They weren't hiding. They weren't worried. They were celebrating. Another notification appeared beneath the photo. A second message. Short. Simple. Cold. Hope you're managing everything back home. I stared at the words until they blurred together. Not apology. Not explanation. Just mockery. That's when the truth settled into place. This wasn't abandonment. This was strategy. And whatever came next, I had the feeling this was only the beginning. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Olivia's smile in that photo from Bali. Champagne glass raised like she had just won something. Like the life we built together was nothing more than a game she had already finished playing. By morning, exhaustion sat heavy behind my eyes. But fear pushed me forward. I couldn't fix this alone. That truth settled deep in my chest as I stared at the contract still glowing on my laptop screen. Legal words stacked on top of legal words, each one hiding danger beneath polite language. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I hadn't used in years. Daniel Kessler, corporate attorney, someone I trusted once. Back when business risks felt manageable and life still made sense. My thumb hovered over the call button longer than it should have. Calling a lawyer meant admitting this wasn't confusion. Not a misunderstanding. Not a temporary crisis. It meant admitting this was war. I pressed the button. He answered on the third ring. Daniel Kessler. It's Marcus Hale, I said, my voice rough from lack of sleep. I need help. There was a short pause on the line. Come to my office, he said calmly. Bring everything? That calm tone both reassured me and made my stomach twist. Because calm voices usually meant serious problems. An hour later, I sat inside his office, gripping a stack of printed documents so tightly my knuckles hurt. The room smelled faintly of polished wood and coffee. Everything looked neat, controlled, professional, nothing like the chaos sitting inside my chest. Daniel sat across from me, reading silently. No expression. No reaction. Just careful focus. That silence stretched longer than I expected. Every second felt heavier than the last. Finally, he stopped reading. He leaned back in his chair and removed his glasses slowly. That movement alone made my stomach drop. This document, he said carefully, tapping the printed contract, isn't just risky. He looked straight at me. It's dangerous. The words settled into my chest like a weight. I swallowed hard. How dangerous. He turned the document around and pointed to a paragraph buried deep in the middle. See this clause, he said. I leaned forward, forcing myself to read the legal text again. At first, it looked harmless. Standard language. Routine business adjustments. But then he explained it in plain terms. If this contract activates, he said slowly, all financial liability transfers to the company owner. That's normal, I replied weakly. He shook his head once. No, not shared liability. Not corporate liability. He tapped the line again. Personal liability. The words made my throat tighten. You mean me? I asked. Yes, he said. Everything shifts to you. Debt. Legal exposure. Claims. Lawsuits. My vision blurred slightly as the meaning sank in. Not the company. Me? My savings. My home. Everything. I leaned back in the chair, pressing my hands against my thighs to keep them from shaking. She signed this, I said quietly. Yes, he replied. And I didn't... Correct, he said. That detail mattered. More than anything. So what happens if I sign it? I asked. Daniel didn't hesitate. You become responsible for every loss tied to this agreement. Every loss. The phrase echoed loudly in my head. Then he flipped to the final section of the contract. Look here, he added. I leaned forward again. Hidden inside the final paragraph sat another clause, smaller, quieter, but far more dangerous. Penalty activation. Triggered immediately after final signature. Automatic. Irreversible. I felt the air leave my lungs. She knew, I whispered. Daniel didn't respond. He didn't need to, because we both understood what that meant. Olivia hadn't just moved money. She had built a trap, carefully, quietly, months in advance. I left the office feeling like the ground beneath me had shifted permanently. The sunlight outside looked too bright, too normal compared to the chaos running through my head. I sat in my car without starting the engine, just breathing, trying to steady myself. That's when my phone buzzed. A notification from social media. Without thinking, I opened it. Vanessa had posted a new video. Location tagged clearly. Bali. The video began playing automatically. Bright sunlight reflected off crystal blue water. Lounge chairs lined the edge of a private pool. Music played softly in the background. Vanessa laughed into the camera, holding up a shopping bag from some designer store I couldn't pronounce. Then the camera shifted, and Olivia stepped into frame, smiling, relaxed, happy, not worried, not afraid. Like nothing had changed. Like she hadn't just destroyed everything we built. A caption appeared across the screen. New beginnings deserve bold moves. I stared at the words until anger replaced the numbness. Not explosive anger. Cold anger. Sharp and focused. She wasn't hiding. She was celebrating. Celebrating what she believed was victory. I drove home slowly, the silence inside the car feeling heavier than before. Once inside, I went straight to the office again. Something else had been bothering me. The missing insurance documents. I opened the backup system and searched through archived files until I found the digital copies. There it was. Insurance policy. Updated recently. I frowned as I opened the newest version. The changes jumped out immediately. Coverage reduced. Protection removed. Liability limits lowered drastically. My chest tightened. This wasn't oversight. This was design. Without proper coverage, any legal claim would hit me directly. Personally, financially, completely. She hadn't just drained the accounts. She removed protection, like stripping armor before battle. A memory surfaced suddenly, sharp and unwelcome. 3 weeks earlier, late evening. Olivia sitting at the dining table, papers spread in front of her. She had asked questions. Calm ones. Careful ones. What happens if insurance changes? She asked. At the time, I answered casually. Didn't question why. Didn't wonder what she was preparing. Now, every word from that night replayed like a warning I had ignored. My phone rang suddenly, dragging me back into the present. Daniel. I answered immediately. Marcus, he said, voice tighter than before. I reviewed the contract again. My chest tightened instantly. And, I asked. There's a timeline clause, he said. Silence filled the space between us. What kind of timeline? I asked carefully. A deadline, he replied. My grip tightened around the phone. How long? 48 hours, he said. If you don't act before then, the contract triggers automatically. 48 hours, the same number that had flashed in the bank notification earlier. My heart began pounding again. This wasn't distant danger anymore. This was immediate. Real. Running. I ended the call slowly and turned back toward the computer screen. The pending transfer still sat there, waiting, silent, like a clock counting down without making a sound. For the first time since this nightmare began, one thing became clear. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was racing against time. That night, the house felt heavier than it ever had before. The birthday cake still sat untouched in the refrigerator, its bright frosting a painful reminder of how the day was supposed to go. Balloons I had bought days earlier remained deflated in their packaging, hidden in the pantry like a celebration that never happened. I sat at the dining table surrounded by paperwork, legal notes, and printed contracts. The USB drive rested near my elbow, small and silent, yet somehow louder than everything else in the room. My mind wouldn't stop running through possibilities. 48 hours. That number kept echoing inside my head like a ticking clock. I pressed my fingers against my temples, trying to steady my breathing. That's when I noticed movement at the edge of my vision. Ethan stood in the doorway, quiet, still, watching me. He didn't speak right away. He just stood there, holding something in both hands, something small and rectangular. Not a toy, not a notebook, something unfamiliar. "What is that?" I asked gently. He hesitated, looked down at the object, then back at me. "Mom didn't want you to know," he said quietly. "But I think you should—" The words tightened something deep inside my chest. He walked slowly toward the table and placed the object in front of me. A small USB drive. I stared at it without touching it. "Where did you get this?" I asked. He swallowed. "Mom's laptop," he said. My heart skipped once. "Why do you have it?" He shifted his weight nervously, twisting his fingers together again. "I heard her talking," he whispered. "On the phone." A chill spread across my shoulders. "What kind of talking?" "Secret talking," he said. The words were simple. Too simple, but heavy with meaning. I picked up the USB slowly, turning it over between my fingers like it might burn me if I held it too long. Then I carried it into the office and sat down at the desk. Ethan followed, standing just inside the doorway, watching, waiting. I plugged the USB into the laptop. The screen blinked once. Then a folder appeared. Several audio files lined the screen, each labeled with dates. Recent ones? Very recent. My hand hovered over the mouse. I clicked the first file. Static filled the speakers for a second. Then voices. Olivia's voice. Clear, sharp, unmistakable. "Once he signs the final document, it's over." The sentence echoed through the room. My chest tightened so suddenly I forgot how to breathe. I replayed the file. Again and again. Each time, the words hit harder. "Once he signs the final document, it's over." Vanessa's voice followed. "You're sure he won't notice?" A short pause. Then Olivia again. Calm, confident. "He trusts me too much." That sentence cut deeper than anything else. Not because it was loud, because it was true. Or at least it had been. I leaned back slowly in the chair, staring at the screen while my hands trembled slightly. This wasn't suspicion anymore. This wasn't theory. This was proof. They weren't guessing. They were planning, carefully, deliberately. I turned toward Ethan. "How did you get these?" I asked softly. He looked down at the floor again. "I didn't mean to at first," he said quietly. I waited, giving him time. "She let me play games on her phone," he continued. "One day I heard her talking when she thought I was asleep." My chest tightened. "And then, I recorded it," he whispered. My throat went dry. "You recorded her?" He nodded slowly. "I thought something was wrong," he said. She kept whispering. Pride and guilt twisted together inside me. My son had noticed danger before I had. He had protected us without even understanding the full risk. I clicked another audio file. The next recording played. Olivia again. Faster this time. More confident. "All he has to do is sign that insurance liability update." The words hit me like a hammer. Insurance liability update. The same document Daniel warned me about. The same trap hidden inside legal language. Vanessa's voice answered again, softer this time. And after that, a short pause. Then Olivia responded, "After that, we won't need him anymore." Silence filled the office after the recording ended. Not noise. Not confusion. Just clarity. Sharp. Painful clarity. I closed my eyes for a moment. Not in weakness. In understanding. This wasn't about money alone. This was about replacement, erasure. They didn't just want to leave. They wanted to leave me carrying the weight of everything. I opened my eyes again and looked at Ethan. He stood exactly where he had before, watching, waiting. "Did Mom make you record these?" I asked. He shook his head quickly. "No," he said. "I did it because I felt scared." That word landed heavily. Scared. My chest tightened. "She told me," he continued slowly, "that you were going to sign something soon." A cold chill spread through my body. There it was again. The final document. The missing step. The moment that would complete everything. I turned back to the computer, replaying the recordings once more, listening carefully to every word, every pause, every tone. Patterns formed quickly now. Pieces connecting. Timelines making sense. They expected me to sign without questioning. Expected me to trust blindly. Expected me to walk straight into the trap. But now, I knew where it was. I closed the laptop slowly and rested both hands on the desk. Breathing steady. Not panicked anymore. Focused. For the first time since this nightmare began, fear began shifting into something else. Control. Strategy. Preparation. I reached for a notepad and began writing. One line at a time. Do not sign anything. Secure all accounts. Contact Daniel immediately. Prepare evidence. Each word felt like reclaiming ground I had already lost. Then I turned toward Ethan again and knelt beside him. "Thank you," I said quietly. My voice cracked slightly despite my effort to keep it steady. "You helped more than you know?" He looked relieved. Like a weight had finally lifted from his shoulders. "Are we going to be okay?" he asked. That question hit harder than any legal threat. I paused for a second, then nodded. "Yes," I said firmly. "We're going to fix this." Not because I believed it fully, but because he needed to hear it. Because hope mattered more than certainty right now. I stood and locked the USB inside the desk drawer carefully. Not just storing it, protecting it, guarding it. That drive held more than recordings. It held survival. My phone buzzed suddenly against the desk. A sharp sound that cut through the quiet room. I picked it up slowly. New email notification? Sender? Insurance department. Subject line. Final signature required. My chest tightened instantly. I opened the message. Deadline listed clearly. Tomorrow? Not next week. Not someday. Tomorrow. I lowered the phone slowly, staring at the screen as the weight of reality settled into place. Time wasn't running anymore. It had almost run out. The sound of tires crunching against the gravel outside froze me in place. I was sitting at the kitchen table, a stack of documents spread out in front of me, the USB drive hidden inside my pocket like a secret weapon. The late afternoon sunlight filtered through the window, casting long shadows across the floor. That sound, familiar and unmistakable, made my pulse spike. Olivia's car. I didn't need to look to know it. Still, I stood slowly and moved toward the window, forcing myself to breathe evenly. My fingers rested lightly against the curtain as I pulled it aside just enough to see outside. There she was, stepping out of the driver's seat like nothing had happened. Vanessa followed from the passenger side, sunglasses perched on her head. A casual smile on her face like she had just returned from a shopping trip instead of helping destroy my life. Neither of them looked nervous. Neither of them looked rushed. They looked confident. That confidence made something cold settle deep in my chest. They believed everything was still working. They believed I was still blind. I stepped back from the window before they reached the front door and returned to the kitchen table. Lowering myself into the chair again, I kept my expression neutral, forcing my shoulders to relax even though tension ran through every muscle. The front door opened. Footsteps echoed across the hardwood floor. Olivia walked into the kitchen, rolling her suitcase behind her. She paused when she saw me sitting there. For a brief second, her eyes searched my face. Then she smiled. Not warmly, not nervously, just controlled. "You look tired," she said casually. Her voice sounded exactly the same as always. Calm, measured. like nothing in the world had changed. I held her gaze steadily. "You look rested," I replied. Vanessa stepped in behind her, dragging her own suitcase across the floor. She gave me a small nod, watching me closely like she was measuring my reaction. Neither of them apologized. Neither of them explained. Instead, Olivia set her suitcase aside and walked toward the counter as if she had only been gone for an afternoon. "The trip was nice," she said casually, opening the refrigerator. "Warm weather. Good food. I needed that. Needed that." The words echoed inside my head. I swallowed my anger and kept my voice even. "Sounds relaxing," I said. She glanced at me again, studying my expression carefully. "Did you check the business emails while I was gone?" she asked. The question came too quickly, too deliberately. A test. I recognized it instantly. She wanted to know how much I had seen, how much I understood. "Just the usual things," I answered calmly. "Not a lie. Not the full truth." Her shoulders relaxed slightly. That tiny shift told me everything. She believed I was still unaware. Ethan walked into the room then, moving slowly from the hallway. His steps hesitated the moment he saw Olivia standing there. Normally, he would have run straight toward her, wrapped his arms around her waist, begged for souvenirs. But this time, he stopped halfway across the room, still, watching. Olivia noticed immediately. She knelt down, opening her arms. "Hey, birthday boy," she said softly. "Did you miss me?" Ethan walked forward slowly and hugged her. But his movements felt stiff, forced, not natural, not joyful. I noticed the way his eyes flicked toward me over her shoulder, waiting, watching, like he was checking whether I was okay. I gave him a small nod, a silent reassurance. Olivia pulled back slightly, studying his face. For a brief second, suspicion flickered in her eyes. She noticed the difference. She noticed the distance. That moment passed quickly, but it mattered. Vanessa moved toward the kitchen island, leaning casually against the counter. "So," she said lightly. "Busy day." I met her gaze without smiling. Something like that. She held my stare a second longer than necessary before looking away. That small exchange told me something else. Vanessa wasn't just involved. She was watching, monitoring, measuring reactions. Olivia reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. My pulse quickened slightly as she placed it on the table between us. There it was. The final document. The one that would complete everything. "We need to finalize something tomorrow," she said calmly. Her voice carried quiet authority, like she expected compliance without resistance. "What kind of finalizing?" I asked. She slid the folder closer to me. "Just routine paperwork," she replied. "Insurance adjustments. Business restructuring. Routine." The word sounded almost insulting now. Nothing about this was routine. I opened the folder slowly, scanning the familiar lines of legal language I already understood too well. The same liability update. The same trap Daniel had warned me about. If I signed this, everything would collapse onto me. Olivia leaned against the counter, watching me closely. Vanessa stayed silent, but her eyes never left my face. They were waiting to see hesitation, confusion, compliance. I closed the folder gently and set it back on the table. "When's the meeting?" I asked. "Tomorrow morning," Olivia replied. "At the bank." Bank. Of course. Formal. Official. Irreversible. Everything was lining up exactly the way they planned. Later that evening, the house felt tense despite the quiet. Olivia moved upstairs to unpack her suitcase. Vanessa stepped outside, pacing slowly near the driveway while speaking on her phone. I remained in the living room, pretending to review documents while listening carefully. That's when I heard it. Her voice. Low, barely above a whisper. "Everything is still on track," Vanessa said. I froze instantly. Those words weren't meant for me, but they reached me anyway. Still on track. That meant they believed the plan remained intact. That meant they had no idea what I knew. And that was my advantage. I pulled out my phone carefully and sent a short message to Daniel. "They're back." The response came less than a minute later. "Understood. Meeting confirmed. Everything ready." I exhaled slowly, tension shifting into focus. One by one, I gathered the documents and locked them inside my office drawer. The USB followed, tucked securely into the safe box I had installed years earlier for emergencies I never imagined facing. Tonight wasn't about reacting. It was about preparation. Late that night, I walked quietly past the kitchen and stopped when I saw Olivia sitting alone at the table. She was reviewing the same documents again, reading them carefully. A small smile rested on her lips. Confident, certain. She believed tomorrow would end everything in her favor. She believed I was trapped. I stood in the shadows for a moment longer, watching her without making a sound. For the first time since this nightmare began, a strange calm settled over me. Not fear, not panic, clarity. Because tomorrow, she was going to learn how wrong she was. The drive to the bank felt longer than it should have. Morning sunlight poured through the windshield. Too bright, too calm. Like the world outside had no idea what was about to happen inside that conference room. I kept both hands tight on the steering wheel, knuckles pale, breathing slow and steady. Olivia sat beside me, scrolling casually through her phone. Vanessa sat in the back seat, whispering something now and then that made Olivia smirk. Neither of them looked nervous. That confidence pressed against my nerves like heat. They believed today would end everything in their favor. They believed I was still walking straight into their trap. I glanced at Olivia briefly. She looked relaxed, almost comfortable. That confidence wasn't just arrogance. It was expectation. Expectation that I would sign. Expectation that I would trust. Expectation that I would lose. But today wasn't going to unfold the way she imagined. We pulled into the parking lot, and I parked slowly near the entrance. No one spoke as we stepped out of the car. The silence between us felt heavier than anything said aloud. Inside, the bank lobby looked calm and ordinary. Too ordinary. I led the way toward the private conference room at the back, my steps steady even though my heart pounded hard inside my chest. When I opened the door, the room was already prepared. Daniel sat at one end of the table. Next to him sat the bank manager and an independent accountant, both dressed in professional gray suits, faces serious and attentive. Olivia paused at the doorway. For the first time, I saw something flicker across her face. Surprise! Not fear yet. Just confusion. She hadn't expected witnesses. Vanessa stopped just behind her, posture stiffening slightly. That hesitation didn't last long. Olivia stepped forward with practiced confidence, smoothing her jacket as she took a seat beside me. "Good morning," she said smoothly, forcing a polite smile. Daniel nodded once. "Morning." The air inside the room felt cold, formal, controlled, like a courtroom without the judge. Olivia reached into her bag and pulled out the document. The final contract. She placed it on the table and slid it toward me. "This just formalizes the changes," she said calmly. Her tone sounded routine, businesslike, rehearsed. I picked up the document slowly, flipping through pages I already understood better than she expected. Legal language blurred together, but the trap hidden inside remained clear. Vanessa leaned forward slightly, watching me closely, waiting, measuring. I reached for the pen resting beside the paper. My fingers touched it lightly. The room fell silent. Everyone watching. Everyone waiting. Olivia leaned slightly closer. "It's routine," she whispered. That word again. Routine. The same lie wrapped in polite language. I lifted the pen slightly, holding it above the paper. For a second, the room held its breath. Then I stopped, set the pen down, and leaned back in my chair. "I think we should review something first," I said calmly. The words cut through the silence like a blade. Olivia frowned immediately. "What do you mean?" she asked. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the USB drive. Small, Silent. Heavy with truth. I placed it carefully on the table between us. Vanessa shifted in her seat. Olivia's eyes narrowed slightly. "What is that?" she asked. "You'll see," I replied. Daniel picked up the USB without hesitation and plugged it into the laptop beside him. A few clicks. Then sound filled the room. Static first. Then Olivia's voice. Clear. Unmistakable. Once he signs the final document, it's over. The words echoed against the walls. The reaction was immediate. The bank manager stiffened. The accountant leaned forward. Vanessa's face lost color instantly. Olivia remained frozen. Perfectly still. But the tightness around her eyes betrayed everything. The recording continued. Vanessa's voice followed. "You're sure he won't notice?" Then Olivia again. "He trusts me too much." Silence fell when the recording ended. Not confusion. Not noise. Just stunned stillness. Daniel paused the audio and looked directly at Olivia. "This recording," he said evenly, "indicates clear intent to deceive." The words landed heavily. Fraud. Deception. Intent. Each one struck harder than the last. The accountant reached for the contract again, reviewing it more carefully now. Not casually. Suspiciously. Slowly. "Something's off here," he murmured. He adjusted his glasses and examined the signature closely. "There are irregularities," he said quietly. Olivia shifted suddenly. "That's ridiculous," she snapped. Her voice had changed. No longer smooth. No longer controlled. Defensive. Sharp. Vanessa avoided eye contact completely now, staring down at the table. Daniel slid additional papers forward, transaction logs, financial summaries, printed timelines showing every transfer, every movement, every hidden step. The evidence spoke louder than anything I could say. The bank manager spoke next. Firm. Clear. All pending transfers are frozen effective immediately. Those words shifted the entire room. Olivia's composure cracked visibly. "What?" she snapped. "You can't do that." "It's already done," the manager replied. Vanessa stood suddenly, pushing her chair back. "I don't need to stay for this," she muttered. She turned toward the door. "Sit down," the bank manager said firmly. His voice carried authority. Vanessa stopped, reluctantly returned to her seat. Olivia stood next. Her hands trembled slightly now. "You set this up," she accused, pointing at me. "You betrayed me." The accusation hung in the air like smoke. I remained seated, calm, still, watching. "You planned this," she repeated, louder now. Her voice carried anger, desperation, fear. For the first time since this began, she looked uncertain, unsteady. I spoke slowly, carefully. "I trusted you," I said. 3 words. Simple, heavy. The silence that followed felt deeper than anything before. Daniel stood and spoke again. "We will be initiating a formal investigation," he announced. "All relevant documents will remain secured." The accountant nodded in agreement. The bank manager finalized the hold on the accounts. Everything moved forward without Olivia's control. Without her approval. Without her power. I picked up the pen once more. Not the liability agreement. A different document. Protection order. Safeguard authorization. I signed my name firmly. Not surrender. Protection. Defense. Control. As the meeting ended, Olivia stared at me across the table. Shock filled her expression now. Not anger. Not confidence. Shock. "You planned this," she whispered. I met her gaze steadily. Didn't smile. Didn't gloat. Just watched as realization settled into her eyes. For the first time since this nightmare began, she finally understood. The trap she built was now hers. The room felt strangely quiet after everything collapsed. Not silent in a peaceful way, but in that heavy, stunned way that follows a loud crash. Papers still lay scattered across the conference table. The laptop screen glowed faintly, frozen on the last paused recording. No one spoke for several seconds. Olivia remained standing beside her chair, staring at the table like she couldn't fully understand what had just happened. Vanessa sat rigidly, shoulders tight, eyes fixed downward as if avoiding the reality unfolding around her. The bank manager gathered the documents carefully, stacking them in neat piles while the accountant reviewed the signatures again. Everything moved forward without emotion. Professional. Controlled. Final. Daniel closed the laptop and turned toward Olivia. "We'll need full disclosure of your financial activities," he said evenly. "This includes all related accounts and transfers." His tone carried authority, not anger. That made it feel more serious, more permanent. Olivia finally spoke, but her voice sounded different now, thinner, strained. "This is ridiculous," she said, though there was no strength behind the words. "You're twisting everything." No one reacted. No one argued. That silence spoke louder than any accusation. The accountant cleared his throat and slid the contract aside. "This document is invalid pending investigation," he said calmly. The words landed softly, but they carried weight. Invalid, pending investigation. Not negotiation. Not discussion. Investigation. Vanessa shifted in her seat again, clearly uncomfortable now. Her confidence from earlier had disappeared completely. Olivia turned toward me suddenly. "You ruined everything," she said. Her voice cracked slightly, frustration pushing through whatever composure remained. I watched her carefully, not angry, not satisfied, just steady. There was irony in her words. She built the trap. She planned the fall. Yet now she stood blaming me for refusing to walk into it. Vanessa tried to speak then, opening her mouth like she might explain something. But the bank manager raised a hand gently. "Please remain seated," he said firmly. Authority settled across the room again. Control no longer belonged to them. It belonged to the system now. I remained silent, letting the moment unfold without interference. Because this wasn't about revenge. It was about consequence. Eventually, the meeting ended. Chairs scraped softly against the floor. Documents were secured. Voices lowered into quiet professional tones. Olivia didn't look at me again as she gathered her bag. Vanessa avoided my gaze entirely. They walked out of the room together. Slower than before. Not confident now. Not certain. Just uncertain shadows of the women who had walked in earlier expecting victory. I stayed seated for another minute after they left, breathing slowly, letting the tension drain from my body. Daniel placed a hand briefly on my shoulder. "It's done," he said quietly. "Not everything, but enough." I stepped outside into the sunlight, and the brightness hit my eyes harder than expected. The air felt cooler than it had that morning. Lighter somehow, like pressure had been lifted from my chest. For the first time in days, I took a full breath without resistance. My phone buzzed in my hand. A message from Daniel. "All protective filings complete." That sentence alone carried more relief than anything else I'd heard all day. Assets secured. Accounts protected. Future stabilized. Not perfect, but safe. I drove home slowly, letting silence settle around me. When I pulled into the driveway, Ethan was already waiting near the front window. The moment I stepped inside, he ran toward me, stopping just short like he was afraid of the answer. "Did we lose everything?" he asked. His voice carried fear that no child should have to feel. I knelt down immediately, bringing myself to his level. "No," I said gently. "We didn't." His shoulders dropped instantly, tension draining from his small frame. "Are we safe?" he asked. That word mattered more than money, more than contracts, more than pride. "Safe. Yes," I said firmly. "We're safe." He wrapped his arms around me then, tighter than usual. Not excitement. Relief. That hug meant more than any legal victory. Later that evening, the house felt different again. Not empty. Not tense. Just quiet in a new way. The kind of quiet that follows survival. Over the next few days, the consequences unfolded exactly as expected. Investigations continued. Accounts were reviewed. Vanessa's social media presence disappeared overnight. Her once constant posts replaced by silence. Olivia sent one message. Short. Cold. You didn't understand. I stared at the words for a long moment before locking my phone. No response. No explanation needed. Understanding wasn't required anymore. Protection was. Control was. Moving forward was. Days later, I sat inside the office again. This time with the accountant reviewing updated financial structures. We rebuilt everything from the ground up, secure accounts. Shared oversight. No single point of control. No blind trust. Only verified protection. When it came time to create the final new account, I typed slowly. Name of account. Ethan Future Fund. Seeing those words on the screen felt different than signing any contract before. Not fear. Not pressure. Purpose. Security. Preparation. Later that night, Ethan sat on the floor building with his toy blocks, laughing again like the fear had finally faded from his mind. We celebrated his birthday properly a few days late. Simple cake. Quiet laughter. No decorations needed. Just relief. As I watched him play, a truth settled deep inside me. Betrayal rarely arrives all at once. It builds slowly. Quietly. Hidden beneath comfort and routine. Trust isn't weakness. But blind trust can be. Preparation isn't paranoia. It's responsibility. And survival doesn't always come from strength. Sometimes it comes from awareness. From listening when something feels wrong. From refusing to ignore small warning signs. If you've ever trusted someone with your future, and later realized that trust was used against you, then you already understand how fragile security can be. What I learned from all of this is simple. Protecting yourself isn't revenge. It's responsibility. And sometimes the strongest thing you can do isn't fighting harder, it's preparing smarter. If this story made you think about your own life, your own finances, or the people you trust, then stay here with us. Because stories like this aren't just about drama. They're about learning how to protect what matters before it's too late. And if you believe in learning from real experiences, in turning pain into preparation, then make sure you stay. Keep listening, and be part of the next story.